Yes guys, welcome back to another Fantasy Football Fix YouTube video. My name is FPL Nacho, and in this video we are going to be looking at the top transfers going into game week 36. In particular, the double game week for both Newcastle and Brighton. So don't be forgetting that double. So before we get into it guys, make sure you are hitting that subscribe button, and if you do enjoy the video, please do consider hitting a like. It's also free and it just shows us that you are enjoying the content. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay guys, so first up we are coming to probably the biggest hot topic right now going into double game week 36, and that is whether we should be buying a Newcastle forward, and if so, Wilson or Isak, or for some out there, maybe a double up. Now, we have just come off the back of a game week 35 fixture against Arsenal, which was quite a disappointing fixture actually for a Newcastle perspective, seeing which one we should be buying. We were hoping for a scenario where maybe Wilson got a hat-trick or Isak got a brace or a hat-trick to make the decision clearer, but unfortunately we've walked away with no goals from Newcastle and probably the decision even tougher. So to remind ourselves, Newcastle have a double game week away against Leeds and at home against Brighton. Now, maybe a few weeks ago, this double game week would have looked a little bit easier, but with Sam Allardyce now in charge of Leeds, while I don't think necessarily Newcastle are going to be having the toughest game, it is going to be tougher than what it once was under Javi Gracia. So we need to remember that it isn't as good as what it was maybe a few weeks ago. And we know Brighton are a tough cookie. But what I would say is I would think that that game maybe has goals in it, because defensively, I don't look at Brighton and think that you can't score against Brighton. So when we're just focusing the complete emphasis on forwards, I don't mind the Brighton fixture at all targeting their forwards. So looking at a comparison here between Wilson and Alexander Isak, this is post-World Cup, so game week 17 up until game week 35. And we can see a bit of a common trend here that we're going to touch on regarding the two assets. Expected goals per 90 is in Wilson's favour at 0.69 compared to Isak's 0.54. But both are still very, very good. So I wouldn't be put off by Alexander Isak's XG per 90. It's just the fact that Callum Wilson's is so strong in this period. Expected assists as well is quite interesting, because I think we have the impression that Callum Wilson is just a goal scorer in this Newcastle team. And while I do think that narrative is correct, he has also chipped in along the way with some creative input in the team. But I do think from an eye test perspective, Alexander Isak is definitely the one that is going to be a chance creator while both are on the pitch. And again, as I said, when we are looking at a goal scorer out of the two, Wilson is the one that is picking up the big chances per 90 at 1.39 compared to 0.78. And all that together comes down to expected FPL points per 90, 7.02 for Wilson and 6.46 for Alexander Isak. Now, looking at some recent data, what we had against Arsenal, we actually had both of these start together, which is quite uncommon. We've seen how either bring Wilson on later on in the game and push Isak out onto the left, or we have seen one of the two bench. We actually had a rare situation here where Wilson started as the number 9 and Isak was played on the left of a front three against Arsenal in game week 35. And just to touch on some of the numbers here, because it might be relevant going forward, Wilson played 77 minutes and Isak played 90 minutes. Wilson registered an XG of 0, which is never good. Isak 0.5, so it is worth noting he actually was picking up some goal scoring opportunities off that left-hand side. Expected assists, 0.08 for Wilson, 0.13 for Isak. So Wilson was kind of redundant in this game here, and I don't think we necessarily need to read too much into that, because we have seen in other occasions when both have been on the field, Wilson benefit from Isak's creativity. But in this game in isolation, Wilson was not getting any of the chances in that game. But it's worth noting it was against an Arsenal team who are arguably the best or second best team in the league right now. So when we are looking at these two, I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is I think the common trend is if you are looking for a player between now and the end of the season, because the fixtures do justify that. Leicester at home in game week 37 and Chelsea away is not a bad fixture at all. I think Isak's probably the route to go for, because the minutes consistently have been a bit more favourable for Alexander Isak. Since game week 17, he's played 85 or more minutes in 6 games. And it's worth noting that he was injured at the start of that, so it's kind of only since game week 23. Wilson, on the other hand, has been subbed before the 75-minute mark 6 times. So we are seeing a case where Wilson's either coming on as a sub or getting substituted early, whereas Isak either gets rested or he plays pretty much the full 90 minutes. So if you're looking for a minutes pick, I think Isak's still the route. However, I do think we're in a situation here where Wilson can only play as the number 9 in this Newcastle team, whereas Isak will get pushed out to the left once Wilson is in the team. So if you are looking for that just single player that is going to be in that Newcastle team to put the ball in the net, then I think Wilson is probably the route to go for. And he is a bit more of a differential pick as well from a low ownership perspective. So I think the way I'm looking at it is this. I don't think we can come to a conclusion on which player is going to play the most minutes over this double game week, because we could see a situation where Wilson starts against Leeds and Isak's benched, and then Isak starts against Brighton and Wilson is benched. I think these both get quite similar minutes over this double game week. And if we're looking at just a 1 week punt, because I know a lot of you out there are maybe sat with an Ollie Watkins and the recent blanks have been quite frustrating. Watkins at home against Spurs, I think that's a good time to move him out, even though I don't really rate the Spurs defence. I would much rather have a double game week Newcastle forward over Watkins. And I think for a 1 week punt, my choice would be Callum Wilson and accept that the minutes could be a little bit mixed. Or if you're looking for a forward to have between now and the end of the season, then I think we go for Alexander Isak, because I think the minutes are going to be a little bit better than Wilson's over that period. But it'd be really interested to know what your thoughts are in the comments. I would just favour that goal scorer in this team who plays as the number 9 for that 1 week punt. But please do let me know. Now, we discussed about a double game week team in Newcastle. Let's have a look at another double game week team for game week 36. So that is going to be looking at Brighton, who have a double game week, and it's worth mentioning, not a good double, away against Arsenal and away against Newcastle. Now, while we're touching on the fixtures, it's worth noting as well, they also double in game week 37, at home against Southampton and at home against Man City, with a final day fixture away against Aston Villa. So on the face of it, the fixtures are not good for Brighton, but we need to remember, double game weeks in FPL are very valuable, and gaining that additional fixture, no matter what fixture it is worth targeting for FPL managers. So I brought up 4 players here, mainly on the Brighton attack, because I don't think the fixtures justify a defensive transfer for our Brighton assets. I don't think the time is now to bring in a Steele or an Estupiñán unless it's freeing up funds for you to invest elsewhere in your team. Now, on the screen here, we have got March, McAllister as the midfielders, and Ferguson and Enciso as the forward options. It's worth noting, Mitoma is also in the conversation, but he is the highest owned midfielder of the Brighton bunch. So I just wanted to kind of take him away from the discussion, because I think if we are targeting players, we might want to go for a bit more of a differential low ownership route right now, really trying to chase those mini leagues or those ranks. But when we do discuss the data, I will also tell you the information from Mitoma, just so we can get a cross comparison between the two. So looking at the midfielders first and foremost, we can see here that McAllister leads the way for expected goals per 90 over March at 0.48. But it is worth noting the penalties for McAllister does sway and tip the data a little bit. But again, I think we need to remember that penalties are a really important factor when we are considering players. Penalties do happen, and it's not a reason for us to sniff at. We need to remember that penalties is a good thing when we are considering FPL options, and we'll know that from that penalty in the dying minutes against Man United. March, on the other hand, much more of a chance creator, 0.42 per 90 compared to McAllister's 0.16. So as it comes for a well-rounded asset, March does lead the way, and I do think he is going to get some consistent game time over this period, as it seems like he had his rest against Man United, unless it was him being dropped, but we haven't got any information on that right now. Now, just to quickly read out the Mitoma underlying numbers, just so you got a little bit of a comparison. Mitoma's XG over the same period per 90 is 0.33, so very similar to March's, but his expected assists is 0.17. So kind of looking at it, he is pretty much on par for March for XG and on par for McAllister in expected assists. But when it comes to the big chances, he is right in the middle of the two at 0.54 per 90. And from an eye test perspective, I think we all know that Matoma is the one that gets us off our seats. And we do always think that he is the one that is going to be scoring just because of the way that he's dribbling and attacking his opposition number. But I think all three are fantastic options. I still think March is a brilliant option because of the set pieces from corners. That just gives him that little bit of potential, even if he is having a bad game. And the same applies to McAllister due to penalties. So if I was buying right now and I was investing in an asset, I think I would go for March. The main reason being is we still don't know the injury extent for the likes of Veltman at right back. And we have seen McAllister being deployed as that double pivot as a number 6. With the likes of Enciso playing as a number 10 in the side, we know that there is an opportunity for De Zerbi to switch it up and bring McAllister deeper. And when that does happen, even though he's still getting chances, it does diminish the attacking potential there that what we are seeing as a number 10 in this Brighton team. And because of that slight risk, I think going for March is probably the route I'd go for right now if I was investing in a Brighton midfielder. As we said, Matoma is a fantastic pick. Just know that he is more of a highly owned asset and you might not get those big swings if you are chasing rank. Now, moving into the forwards, I've taken Welbeck out of the conversation just because he is much more expensive. And I do think with us having a very similar structure of Haaland and most likely investment in a Newcastle forward, you might not have that luxury of having 6.5 million to invest in Danny Welbeck. If you do, I think he's a good option. But the same is going to apply to all three of these assets. Rotation is something you need to remember. With a double in 36 and in 37, I do not expect any of these assets in Ferguson or in Enciso to play consistently over this period. So purchasing either of these two is just going to be all about having a third forward that you're happy to bench but also start whenever you need to. And it's going to come down to your team structure. Now, Enciso has been the exciting pick recently, and what I do like about him as he's played as a number 10, he's also played off the right of a front three when there has been rotation in the Brighton team. So it's come at a cost, but also a pro. The bad thing, we really don't know whether he is in the starting 11 once everyone is available. But the good thing is, we know that if anybody does get rotated, he can fit in any of those positions in the front three or even as a forward in this team. And looking at the underlying numbers, they're really promising. 0.5 XG per 90, 0.26 XA per 90 is really good numbers. Ferguson, on the other hand, is just coming back from injury and he could be back for tonight's game, and that will give us a bit more information when we are making our Game Week 36 decisions. But whenever he is in the team, he is spearheading that attack with a 0.54 XG per 90, and the big chances do really funnel through Ferguson. So if I was going for one right now, I think Enciso is probably the exciting pick because you know that even if he doesn't play as the 10, he could play on the right, he could play on the left. But Ferguson, for me, is the one that if Welbeck was to pick up an injury, he would start most games as that number 9. And we could see him be the gem pick for between now and the end of the season. So to conclude, March would be the pick of the midfielders. Ferguson would be the pick of the forwards, only if we were to see some fatigue or injury to Welbeck. Otherwise, Enciso is that exciting pick that is going to be incredibly lowly owned and could be deployed in any sort of position for Brighton. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd be really interested to know if anyone is still investing in Brighton, as I know quite a few already are tripled up on them. It would be interesting to know what route you are going for. So last up, let's touch on probably one of the assets that has been sold heavily over the last few weeks, but we really do need to have him back on our radars. And that, of course, is going to be the Arsenal midfielders. Some of the best value picks in the game this season. However, a lot of FPL managers have started to move away from them over the past month to invest in the teams that had double game weeks in 34 and also going forward in the likes of 36 and 37. So the fixtures remaining for Arsenal is Brighton at home, Forest away and Wolves at home. And I really do think Arsenal are going to have an incredibly strong finish to the season. I don't view Brighton as a bad game from a defensive perspective. I really do think they can get at them, and there could be goals in that fixture like there was in the flip side of this earlier on in the season. So Saka, Odegaard and Martinelli are the ones that are considering. Trossard for me is too much of a rotation risk. Now, expected goals per 90 and expected assists per 90 are going to be in Martinelli's favour, and he really has emerged as that value pick in the Arsenal bunch. He had his downturn earlier on in the season where he was getting rotated with Trossard, and I know he got rotated recently in game week 34, but I do expect Martinelli to get the bulk of the game time between now and the end of the season. And when he is on the field, he is the man to target. The big chances per 90 as well in his favour at 0.62. And I think Saka has always been the one to go for over the course of this season because he's on the penalties and he really has been the main man in this Arsenal team. But I don't know whether it's the eye test being a bit biased, but it does look like he is a little bit fatigued and not necessarily at the top of his game. And when we are buying an FPL with only 3 game weeks remaining, we really want to target that player that is in the moment the guy to own. And talking about the man to own, right now that is Odegaard picking up the goals. I believe he's got 3 goals in his last 2 games, and he really is taking that mantle as the star man in this Arsenal team and being the creative force that we know of, but also the goal threat, which we haven't seen as much over the course of this season. But with that said, even though Odegaard has been in amongst the returns recently, I still would favour Martinelli as my pick of the bunch if you are investing in an Arsenal asset. Now, I understand with a lot of FPL managers out there, they're probably thinking this is a tough team to target because very hard for you to sell your Man United because they double in 37. Very difficult to sell any Brighton because they have back-to-back doubles. But I do think if you are chasing rank and you maybe have that rogue player in your midfield that you could ship out for an Arsenal player, I really do think going to Martinelli this week is the fantastic move to make. I know they haven't got any doubles, but I think there's going to be goals in all 3 of these fixtures. And you know that none of the FPL community are really going to be going to Arsenal players because of the difficulty of getting to them. So I understand they're tough to get to. I probably wouldn't sell Man United assets, even though they have been woeful the last few weeks. But if you really want to chase rank, you're chasing those mini leagues, I think Martinelli is a man to go for. And he just really works well in this Arsenal team with the introduction of Jesus, flipping roles, him playing as a centre forward at times, eating up those big chances. But again, let me know in the comments. I'll be super interested to know if anyone is going to them. So that is going to conclude the Game Week 36 top transfers. I really hope it's provided some value. And if it did, please do consider hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, drop a subscription on the page. It is always appreciated and free to do. So I will see you in the next video, guys. Take care. Cheers.